Okay, everyone. So nice to see you again. Welcome to Inside the Music for September 2023 with the Fresno Philharmonic. I'm so happy that you're here today, and hopefully we're going to have some fun. So welcome. Yes, I wasn't here last year. I was a U.S. Fulbright Scholar in Ireland at the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance. Dance. I hear a feedback, so if everyone would mute, that would be great. This is the academy here with the perspective from a bridge that goes across the Shannon River. It's called the Living Bridge because it moves with the tide. So absolutely wonderful space. If you've never been to Limerick, I highly recommend it. It's on an Atlantic estuary. It has the oldest functioning Gothic cathedral and old castle, and it's just stocked with history in a wonderful place. The one thing I wanted to share with you all, since I know you're interested in discovering different music and new music, this is the founder of the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance, and that's pronounced something like Micheál O'Sullivan, and his wife is the director now. Her name is Helen Phelan. But Micheál was a composer and a conductor, an impresario, all of these things. But I came to love his music for orchestra. So you might want to write his name down and check out some of the recordings. There are lots of videos with the Irish Chamber Orchestra, which is in residence at the Academy, and of course the National Symphony. And if you want to hear pipes like you've never heard them before, he wrote a concerto for the Irish pipes with orchestra that is just absolutely, absolutely stunning. So I just highly recommend you check out his music. It's highly accessible and extremely enjoyable and like nothing you've ever heard. So that's what I would say a good recommendation. So if we look at the ad that came out for the new season, which I'm very, very excited about, it says jazzing it up, right? So I just wanted to ask the audience real quickly, when we see a term like that, when we see jazzing it up, we have certain reactions to it, right? Emotionally from seeing that. So would someone like to just chime in and volunteer what they think, what they think of when someone says something's being jazzed up? Anyone? Kay, Patricia, chime in.
Well, I'm thinking about, alternate chords and added notes and things like that, different sort of scales.
Okay, so Lorenzo was talking about pitch content. So if you're jazzing up music in particular, and you can jazz anything up, right? But if you're jazzing up music, maybe there are certain pitch relationships, maybe there are certain harmonies, maybe there are certain inflections that are intrinsic to that style of music. So that's one possible answer. Okay, Sandy, someone chime in.
Yeah, lively.
Lively. Okay, so if you jazz something up, you maybe make it a little bit more sparkly, a little more energetic, a little more lively. Wonderful. Do we have one more word?
Here, using some of the trains a few days ago in Mexico, the largest freight.
Any other? Okay.
Well, non-traditional.
Okay, non-traditional. Thank you so much for chiming in. So non-traditional. So that gives us a certain connotation, and I'm sure the Fresno Phil PR people looked at that and said, "Wow, that's a really interesting term, and it's going to be an interesting concept for a season." Before we get into how that term pervades and goes through the Masterworks series, I thought it might be fun and interesting just to go into that term just a little bit more. So there's actually a relationship, believe it or not, between jazz and baseball. Does anyone know what that might be?
Ken Burns.
Okay, Ken Burns. Okay, well, can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, he did documentaries on jazz and baseball.
Yes,
on
he did
PBS.
documentaries on both, so that's one commonality, right?
They're both American.
Both American. There's another commonality. Wonderful. Because that's something very important when we talk about anything having to do with jazz, that it's often referred to as America's like classical music. It's something from the United States. Well, I'll cut to the chase. So the relationship is that jazz seems to have originated among white Americans, and the earliest printed uses are in California baseball writing, Go California, where it was described, and I need to minimize that other window, where it means lively and energetic. Someone said lively, right? Someone said that. Let's jazz this up. The earliest known usage occurred April 2nd to 1912. So here it is, right here. I think this is kind of fun because the article title was Ben's Jazz Curve. That's what my next album should be, Ben's Jazz Curve. I got a new curve this year, softly murmured Henderson yesterday, and I'm gonna pitch one or two of them tomorrow. I call it the jazz ball because it wobbles and you simply can't do anything with it. Right? So something really lively, unpredictable. That's a little derogatory, right? That term. And actually, the term jazz was originally kind of derogatory, just like the term Baroque. Actually, like we talk about Baroque music, that originally was derogatory. It meant irregularly shaped and not in a nice way. So in a way, the term jazz and Baroque have some things in common. Stephen actually shared this with me and reminded me of it when we were talking the other day, that the definition of jazz is kind of hazy today. Like, what is jazz music? Can we really define what that is? It's sort of like Justice Stewart's definition of pornography, when famously he said, I know it when I see it, right? Chicago papers definitely referred to a music called jazz by 1915. And since you mentioned Ken Burns, it might interest you to know that Ken Burns says that the term came from New Orleans after the term jasmine, like Jas. But this usage supposedly predates that, and it did come not from New Orleans, but which was more ragtime, right? And it did come more from the Chicago area, apparently. So the term actually, what did jazz musicians think of the term? What did they think of the term way back? Well, they said it was done by whites and not the black musicians who created it. Sidney Bechet said in his book, jazz, that's a name the white people have given to the music. And part of the reason was to commercialize the music, right? We have to call it something so that then we can sell it and define it. So let's get down to what is jazz, and maybe then how the season and the music that you're going to hear this season were impacted or reflect or somehow mirror jazz. Wynton Marsalis defines it pretty narrowly, like, it has to have that swing. He's from New Orleans, so he sees it sort of in that way. And there are many black artists like Billy Taylor, Nicholas Payton, who advocate using terms like America's classical music or similar terms. Part of the reason is that jazz is this huge umbrella. It's not just jazz if it swings. It's not just jazz if you have certain instruments. It's a much bigger, broader category than that. In fact, if you listen to my album, The Poetry of Jazz, with Philip Levine, there are many tracks on there that really stretch the definition of what jazz is. Some of them are absolutely completely written out, but some people say there has to be improvisation for it to be jazz. So it's pretty undefinable. So before we go to Ray and Stephen to bring us through the season and how jazz is, that thread goes through it, I thought it might be fun to at least identify one thing that is pretty identifiable in a lot of jazz, but not all jazz. Blues and jazz are two different things, but there is something called a blue note. And that's something that blues musicians started using that was different than what Western musicians were using in the pitch arena. So to make a very long story short, I, years ago for my dissertation, studied this and studied the tonal languages of West Africa. And it turns out, long story short, that if you take someone whose brain neurological structure is geared toward West African tonal languages with those particular inflections and pitches that are used, And then you separate them from anyone who speaks that same tone language, and they're forced to speak English, right? And not just any English, but the Southern English. The pitch, because of the way the vocal structure is formed, et cetera, blue notes actually appeared in speech. This is my supposition based on recordings by Alan Lomax and others, appeared in speech before it appeared in music. And one of the ideas I had about why that might be is the way overtones work. So we're not going to do a deep dive. We're going to do a very, very, very short dive. This, you're going to hear one instrument, a grand piano, play a C, and that's here on your screen, down at the bottom. That's called the fundamental frequency. But the string is vibrating not just as a full length, but a half length. That will give off the octave. It's also vibrating simultaneously a third of the distance of the string, and that's giving off another note, G, an octave and a fifth above that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see them on this graph when the instrument plays. So that's a grand piano. That's a harpsichord. So what this graph can visually show us is that we have more upper harmonics in a harpsichord at the time of attack than we do in a piano, and that's part of why a harpsichord sounds like a harpsichord and a piano sounds like a piano. Okay, that's a whole nother discussion. But what I want to point out is there are notes up here. If we keep going up the overtone series, it looks like it's a major scale. But when we get to certain degrees, they don't align with what we in the Western world, the notes that we use. Instead, they're inflected. So in other words, you don't get this note. You don't get that upper note, the fourth, really, you get this note. So blues players used it like sort of like that. So there are particular
We
notes.
couldn't really hear that. Do you have the original sound for musicians on? Or maybe it was just me. I had it on, off.
I don't have the speech hooked up, but I did
Okay.
transcribe the speech, and I did transcribe it into music and run it through computer programs and all of that. So in other
Sorry to
words,
interrupt.
it sounds like this. Do do di da yo do ba do da da. Do da do di da da do da da do da do da da. So those particular frequencies weren't in regular use in Western music, but they were in blues, and that became associated with jazz music. So a lot of things that are say that they have jazz influences use those devices that are called blue notes. And I'm pretty sure at least a few of the pieces that you're going to hear this season have that in it. So let's now go to Ray and Stephen. Now that we have had a little understanding of the huge umbrella of jazz, that jazz was a predominant musical style, that first it was seen as maybe being a little something naughty, but then it came to be seen as something really sophisticated, and then really embraced, and something that we in the United States are extremely proud of, how that theme runs through the season. So Ray, do you want to take it away with the
Sure.
I won't even do the slide so that they can see you better.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for that introduction. That just really sets everything up perfectly. And who better than a jazz musician to introduce our jazzing it up season. So thank you so much, Ben. So our direction as an organization has really been about bringing living composers more to the forefront of our programs. And I'm so thrilled that you, our audience members and our supporters have been really enthusiastic about this. And Stephen and I felt like this is a kind of a next step into discovering American music for us. And what better way than this incredible genre of jazz? And we think of jazz and classical music as two different genres, right? But the incredible thing and discovery that we made was that there were so many European composers and American composers incorporating jazz, incorporating all these elements of the blue note in their music in the 20th century. And so we're really exploring everything in each program, this thematic tie, this link to this collaboration of jazz and classical music, that it's a conversation that's happening, a collaboration that's happening with these composers that we're featuring. And also, Stephen, you could talk about the new direction that all the concerts are now in Shikoyan.
Right. Yes. So yeah, the new directions was both musical and literal, geographic. that people have to check their GPS before heading to the Philharmonic and think which concert am I going to, Masterworks or Pops. So.
Right, and the idea is that I feel that the Fresno Philharmonic has been such an incredible organization in really kind of innovative things that we're doing, and to have a whole season incorporating jazz elements in our program is just very, very exciting. So Ben, would you mind showing us the slides for this season? All right, so this weekend is the French connections with the piece Valerie Coleman's Umoja, which we'll talk about later, the Mozart Symphony and the Poulenc. The Poulenc two-piano concerto I will be playing and conducting, but that's the element of jazz, and we'll talk about this specific program later, but I want to just move ahead to the upcoming concerts. So the Riff of Life is the November concert. It features a wonderful co-commission that we are doing with the London Philharmonic and the Oregon Symphony, the Human Archipelago for Cello and Orchestra. It's a cello concerto featuring Inbal Segev, but the composer is Vijay Iyer. He is an incredible jazz musician, jazz pianist, also composer. And the really incredible connection is George Antheil's Jazz Symphony, which is really based on New Orleans jazz, which Ben was talking about earlier. So this connection with rhythm, with an American composer, and a living American composer, and of course, Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, which is incredible. It's a piece written with rhythm in mind. So that's called the Riff of Life. The next concert, we're continuing the Mahler series, Here and Now. Now, this does not have a jazz element to it, but because we wanted to continue the Mahler survey, the symphony survey, we wanted to feature the Fourth Symphony with Jasmine Habersham, our soloist, and Gabrielina Frank, California composer, Contested Eden, which is about climate change and the California fires. So we're really talking about nature, about climate change, and so many issues that we're being confronted with at the moment. Then the next concert, we're very excited to have Timothy McAllister, an incredible saxophonist, featured in a piece about John Coltrane, his music. It's called A Kind of Train. And this is a French composer, a living French composer, who was born in 1971, Guillaume Connaissance, A Kind of Train. That's our kind of jazz element of this program. But not only that, we're featuring John Adams, an American composer, in the Chairman Dances, which is a foxtrot, right? So another American jazz element of dance in this concert. And then the Brahms Symphony No. 3, which is an elusive, again, rhythmic element where are we in 6? Are we in 3? There's this constant push and pull of hemiolas in this incredibly gorgeous symphony. So tying that in, then our final June concert of the Masterworks series is featuring American in Paris, and ending with Bolero. So lots of elements of jazz in that final concert. But we're okay. Are we moving on to Sunday's concert? Ben, you want to help me? Yes. Okay.
Yes, I had a Zoom freeze. So yeah, so we're gonna move on then to this coming concert this weekend. And by the way, I am so excited. I think the programming gets better and better and better every year at the Fresno Philharmonic. Last year I was sad that I wasn't able to be there, and this season just looks so fabulous, and I'm so interested in the new pieces, and I just think it's a fabulous, fabulous program. So on this concert, we not only have the Poulenc, which has the jazz influence, we also have a piece by Valerie Coleman. And I had written down in my notes how to pronounce that. Emoja, is that right?
Umoja.
Right?
Umoja. Yes.
Umoja, right? And it's the subtitle is the Anthem of Unity. It was commissioned by this version was commissioned by the Philadelphia Orchestra. It's about 10 minutes long. That's where the pronunciation is. And Valerie, interestingly, is a flutist and a composer. And it's not that surprising then that the original instrumental version of this was for wind quintet. Okay. Where does the Umoja come from? It's a Swahili word that means unity. And it's the first day in 7 in the African American celebration of Kwanzaa. And that original version usually had call and response. So I thought it might be fun, just for a teeny little snippet, to play for you what the wind quintet that Valerie is in sound like playing this piece. And then when you go to the concert, you'll hear elements of that she reworked the entire piece for orchestra. It's sort of like a horn feature in this version. So let me get that up and share that version with you. And you get to hear Valerie play the flute. She's the flutist on the far left. So I think that's great. I love the sound of that, the motion, the ins and outs. It's just a really, really fun piece, I think. So I think you're going to.
Yes, and Ben, I felt like it was really important to open our season of unity, of not just opening our season together, but really marrying again the two genres of jazz and improv and classical music, that it's all just one, that we're all just sharing this experience together in the hall, experiencing it in this setting as well, and how important that language of music is to all of us.
It is, and it's music is. There was a discussion recently here about that music opens up forms of communication and understanding that other types of communication don't. That's part of its wonderful power, and I think that piece is emblematic of that and blends tons of different styles. And it's a great season starter, great program.
Well, and I think our audiences will listen to the opening of it and think, wait, is that Aaron Copland?
So a modern twist. I like it. It's cool.
Yes. So I think that it's an incredible opening.
Tell me about your partner in crime. So Rei is playing not only a concerto, she's playing a double piano concerto by Poulenc, and it's with someone that I think you've performed with, but never in concert. Is that right? Or never?
No, Okay, so our guest artist is the pianist and conductor, William Eddins. He goes by Bill. And he and I went to school together. We went to Eastman, USC together. He's also an incredible pianist, conductor, like I just said. His day job is conducting the Philadelphia Orchestra, jazz at Lincoln Center. You know, he's conducted at Carnegie Hall, all over the world. The Royal Scottish Orchestra to, you know, all over Europe. And he and I have always had this passion of playing and conducting. So he does this quite often with his other guest conducting elements. So I thought it would be really fun to collaborate together here in Fresno to share this incredible, fun two-piano concerto by Francis Poulenc.
Do you want to talk just a little more about maybe how you're going to be set up or elements of the piece that are clearly interesting?
So I think this is not us, by the way.
No.
Obviously, it's not the Fresno Phil, but I think some of you might have been to the last two-piano concert where we performed with Fabio, and we did the Mozart E-flat major 360 K365 two-piano concerto. This was the setup for the Mozart. To this weekend's performance of the Poulenc will be completely different in that my back will be to the audience and the pianos will be facing each other perpendicular, not across the stage. And this is due to the reasoning being I will be conducting many sections of the orchestra in this work, including percussion, tuba, basses. And so in order to do so, I need to be able to see the entire orchestra and lead them in this setting. So it's a really crazy way to play and conduct, but it's really fun.
Well, we're all looking forward to seeing that. So since we're approaching the 30 minutes after, I thought it would be fun to open up for questions.
So was Poulenc inspired by Mozart?
Yes, and you know that, Lorenzo.
Thank you for the spoon feeding.
Yeah, so the second movement of the piano concerto, the two-piano concerto by Francis Poulenc, is inspired by a Mozart piano concerto, in that it's actually a written out little second movement. And you'll think, wait, I thought we were playing French music and now we're playing Mozart, you know? But again, he does a little bit of jazzing it up in that second movement. He jazzes up Mozart. Is that possible? Well, you will hear that on Sunday. And the entire work is about 20 minutes, 3 movements. And it is basically a composer's thought process, I think. I don't know, Ben, maybe it's not, but because you're a composer. But he just goes through spontaneous events in his head. So we'll, you know, start right away with the horses racing, the gun being fired. We're just racing to the end. And then all of a sudden he'll shift gears and we're sitting in a cafe having a nice glass of wine. And then we'll be like 2 kids playing on a playground, fighting each other. And then you'll hear some ragtime music. And so it's very, like, I like to use the word spontaneous. You know, it's like kind of just this thought process of jumping from one thing to another throughout the entire work. And by the way, the orchestra loves to play this piece because it has that element of fun and excitement in it.
Yeah, and I think actually just in that way, Ray, I think that it equates with a piece you're playing later, American in Paris, I think. And you know, you're in an urban environment and things are happening and it's very active and rhythm and rhythmic shifts play a big role in it. And so it's just really fun. What is your favorite part of I like to ask performers this question.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked.
Have these have these things that they're really looking forward to, and there are a couple things that you're afraid of, right?
Right, right. So the end of the first movement and the end of the last movement features gamelan music. I don't know if any of you have heard gamelan ensembles. It's southeastern Indonesian gong ensemble. And Poulenc had this incredible ingenuity to make the piano sound like a gamelan instrument, the two pianos. So you'll hear us playing this rhythm, it's constant 16th note rhythm that sounds like you're in a different, environment, like you're in this gorgeous, tropical island. And you're hearing these sonorities that are not Western based. So that's one of my favorite parts. But of course, being the ultimate, Les Six, rebel, French composer, he ends it with like a little period at the end. The little period is at the end of the first movement. The big, like, this is the ending, out of nowhere is the end of the last movement. So you'll hear us like stomping, basically the pianos are stomping this ending inverted chords all the way to the end with the orchestra. So it's very whimsical in that way.
How fun. And I actually, one of the funnest things I got to do when I was in Ireland was I actually wrote a concerto for saxophone and gamelan orchestra, because they have a gamelan orchestra at the academy, and it was a real challenge to figure out how to make a Western instrument work with instruments that are tuned in different ways, and where there are intentional vibrations and beats between the different sets. And yeah, it's a different sound world. Here's a fun thing to do: not only go and hear that entire Valerie Coleman piece, the woodwind version, and not only to listen to some music of Micheál O'Sullivan, but also check out gamelan. Just Google like Javanese gamelan and listen to how it sounds. It's really an amazing, amazing sound. So I see why that's your favorite part, Ray.
Yes, but there is one part in the last movement where, and I want you all to listen for this, where the pianos are basically, when you were little and you would say na 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 na. Well, Poulenc actually puts this in our two piano part, and the orchestra is like fight, 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 fight. So listen for that part in the middle of the third movement.
Yeah, and if you read about books about the origin of music and the relationship of music to speech, you'll find that mama, mama for the word for mother in many, many cultures. Not every culture has that interval, which is roughly a minor third, but many, many, many cultures do. And it oftentimes is when a child is saying something like mother, or the communication between mother and child, which is kind of interesting that's a universal little snippet of music that's all over the world. That's kind of fun. And Poulenc then
yes,
and we all resonate with it, and we're happy because it's somewhere deep down in us. We've heard that and know it, and it taps those centers of our brain that are really, really interesting.
Well, and it's really fun because I know Bill, we're very good friends. And so we look at each other across the pianos and we really want to stick our tongue out at each other.
Well, are we going to see any big smiles or laughter, do you think? I mean,
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, it's nice to see people having fun when they perform, right? Or is there anything else about the upcoming concert, Ray, you think would be helpful for folks?
Yes, I think the Mozart Symphony is fascinating in that it really reminds me, I mean, of course, all of Mozart's music is opera-based, but this symphony, especially the last movement, reminds me of the overture to the Marriage of Figaro. And I want you all to really keep that in mind when you're listening to this piece, that it's this virtuosic element of it, or just playing really fast, but at the same time, there's this ebullient quality to it. And I really, it's one of my favorite symphonies, the Hafner Symphony.
Yeah, and I actually think Mozart, if he were alive today, he would be conducting and playing piano. He'd probably also be a jazz person. He'd probably improvise. And that's one of the components that across a lot of jazz, not all jazz, is that feeling of sort of improvising, which is what Ray was alluding to in the composition of Poulenc. It's not jazz, but it's having that same sort of sensibility where you can go where you think you want to go, and maybe I'll bring the listener to this new place. And that's one of the sensibilities I think that is in common with most jazz composers anyway. And I think Bach and Beethoven would have been killer, absolutely killer jazz musicians.
Absolutely.
Doing some kind
Yes.
of a blended style like Tigran Hamasyan, who's fabulous at that, right? Blending. Sometimes you think he's a classical pianist, and sometimes you think he's a jazzer, and you kind of don't know what you're going to get when you go. It's a lot of fun. I guess
Right.
Keith Jarrett's like that too, right? So
Right. And I think this whole exploration of jazz and classical music is really to open up our minds that it's not, there are no boundaries, there are no walls. So let's break them down and just explore them and experience them together.
yay! Any other
Ben?
final
Ben.
questions, Lorenzo?
It's a little heady and complicated, but it's just kind of a response to when Ray was saying that Mahler wasn't jazz, and something you might want to revisit when you start talking about. It's just that it's not jazz, but what's going on now with the blending of the genres, or the mixing of the streams into the same body of water that we all drink from. My theory, and again, I don't have an opportunity to write a dissertation, but that the strict harmony rules in the 18th century were either consciously or subconsciously to sort of eliminate the Eastern other elements from European music. And it didn't take long for people to say, "No, I'm bringing this stuff back in." So Mozart and Beethoven and Rossini and all, they're bringing back the Eastern elements. So this, and of course Debussy and Ravel and all the people like that. And so, this is just a continuation of that sort of trying to bring everything back together. And Mahler, while he wasn't necessarily jazz, he was adding in the Eastern elements to his music, and so again, it's part of the same process, I think. Even though
right, and that's great that you brought that up, Lorenzo, because the beginning of the Fourth Symphony is sleigh bells.
Mm-hmm.
Who would start a symphony with sleigh bells? So anyway, yes, well, lots more to talk about when we get to the Mahler concert.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're going to have to continue it over a pint, Lorenzo.
Okay.
One other thing too that I wanted to give a shout out in terms of the jazz theme through the season. Give a shout out to our extraordinarily talented graphic designer Suzanne Bertz Rosa. And I don't know how many of you caught it, but like the graphic design for the season emulates the Blue Note record albums, the famous jazz label that did such an incredible job trying to translate the notion of jazz into graphic design. And so we sort of are riffing, as we say, on that, not exactly copying it, but sort of like taking that as a point of departure. So we were trying to get that visually as well as in terms of the music that was programmed.
Super. Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy that all of you are here. One little bit of just shameless information. I have a new jazz album that was out last Friday. So one week ago. So if you Google me, and it'll probably come up. It's called Caught in the Rhythm. It's yet another poetry and jazz album, and it features some of the top jazz people in the world. One of them will be
There it is. Yeah.
on parade this weekend. So anyway, you might want to check that out.
All right. Well, Thank you, Ben, and thanks everybody for joining us. We look forward to seeing you this weekend in Paul Sheboygan Hall. Don't forget, north, not south. So look forward to seeing you all this weekend.
Okay, thank you all for being here. It's such a pleasure. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you